Tate Modern is Britain's National Gallery of International Modern Art and Forms, part of the Tate Group. It is the most visited modern art gallery in the world and the second most popular tourist attraction in the United Kingdom, with 5.5 million visitors in 2030. Chris Dercon is an art historian, a documentary filmmaker, and cultural producer. Since he was appointed director of Tate Modern in London in 2011, he has been leading the museum's groundbreaking programs and its unmatchable expansion project. In his talk, he will question the future of museums of art, which have always been placed in a constant state of disruption and transformation. Presenting a unique platform for human encounters, he will consider the museum's potential to become a new type of public space, one for social play and innovation, facilitating new forms of art, creativity and thinking, where people will look and interact with art as well with each other. Now, I would like to thank the British Council Turkey for this wonderful collaboration. Now it's my pleasure to invite Margaret Jack, the British Council Turkey Director, to take the floor. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Levent Bey, and hoş geldiniz, a wonderful audience this evening. Very warm welcome. We're now halfway through the UK Museums Talk programme, and we're just delighted that the programme is attracting such great interest, not just here in Istanbul with our partner Istanbul Modern, but also in Bursa, where the British Council is repeating the talks in partnership with Bursa Metropolitan Municipality, with the Belediye, but also from audiences right across Turkey through our digital platforms. Over the last 3 talks, we've looked at the role of museums in urban regeneration with Turner Contemporary. We've looked at developing museum collections with the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art. And we've looked at rethinking the notion of museums with National Museum Wales. For those of you in the audience who may have missed the talks, or indeed may like to watch them again, there are video recordings of the talks, both in English and in Turkish, and they're on the British Council's Vimeo account. So just type in britishcouncil.org.tr Vimeo, and it gets you there. Please do enjoy, please share, and help us inspire and inform wider audiences in Turkey. So after looking at innovative, bold, and inspiring initiatives from 3 of the nations which make up the United Kingdom, Scotland, Wales, and England, today we're turning to London and Tate Modern. It's, as Levent Bey has said, the most visited modern art museum in the world, and we're delighted to welcome its director, Chris Dercon, to speculate on the future of museums. How we think, how we talk, and how we practice the arts, both as individuals and as institutions, reveals much about the kind of society we are. And it makes the case that recognizing and celebrating diversity is not only essential to a proper understanding of culture, but also an understanding of our own country and the countries around us. Museums play a key role, providing a very valuable sense of connection with the past and with the present, and they help us make sense of our own and each other's cultural identities. So it's absolutely no surprise that in an increasingly connected world, museums are changing, then serving as a springboard for the future, where culture, science, technology increasingly come together to be exhibited, to be exchanged, to be experienced, and internationalized for the enjoyment of new audiences. So with those thoughts in mind, thank you again for joining us. Please enjoy your evening as we welcome Chris Dercon for his talk. Thank you, çok sağ olun.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Levent. Thank you for the publicity about Tate Modern and all the figures about millions of visitors. so I don't have to do that anymore. I'm not going to make propaganda for Tate Modern. I'm going to make propaganda for museums, museums all over the world. And I'm going to make propaganda not just for the museum I believe in, which is the public museum, but I'm also going to make propaganda for those of us who, by necessity, have to come up with different systems of museums. And different organizations of museums think about the mix between private and the public, but also think, because of necessity, of those museums who are privately funded. We are looking for the first image. By the way, I really would like to thank not just the British Council, of course, because as a Belgian, I'm representing Great Britain in London tonight. I would like to thank very, very much the Istanbul Modern, because this is probably the 8th or the 10th time I've been here. And I was so lucky that when I was director of the Haus der Kunst in Munich, that we got to organize here in Istanbul for you at the Istanbul Modern, the exhibition of Andreas Gurski. You remember? Of course, there are all these encounters with great curators here and with great artists, and I'm a little bit embarrassed to have noticed that some of the works here in the collection are identical to the works by Turkish artists in Tate Modern. So original we are not anymore. I'm also very happy to be here amidst works of artists who I admire dearly. I mean, Sarkis is going to represent Turkey at the next Venice Biennial. But in the back is Faranisa Zaid. Faranisa Zaid, who, as you know, is a Turkish-Jordanian artist, or should I now say Jordanian-Turkish artist? I don't know. I don't want to get into this game of geopolitics. This is a work of 1951, and it's called My Hell. It doesn't look very much like My Hell. And probably her hell is tonight my paradise. It's a beautiful work which makes me again jealous, because it's one of the artists we are chasing. We would love to represent her work in our exhibition. And there is also the work of Ayse Erkman. Ayse Erkman was, of course, somebody very important who introduced actually René Bloch when you were organizing the very first Biennial of Istanbul, who my colleague Caroline Christoph Bakerviers is now going to organize next September. And I'm confronted with the glass box of Monica Bonvencini. So what else could I wish, right? So thank you very much for being here. A couple of years ago, the Art News magazine, which is an American magazine, published in 2001 this cover, and it says the incredible growing art museum. And of course, Art News was talking about what? Art News was talking about the Bilbao effect and about the fact that museums got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But we were only talking about size and not about scale. And you know what the difference is between size and scale? Scale is a human condition. Size is just about, bigness. What we all got wrong, first of all, is that the expansions of museums, like Levent and Margaret were already announcing, is actually the condition of the museum. If a museum is not transforming itself, if a museum is not being disrupted constantly with new thinking about walls and with new buildings and new foyers and new cafes and new storages, then it's not a museum. Not because we want to get bigger, but constantly the museum wants to be and wants to become something else. Sometimes in pace with the way artist movements and artists go, sometimes completely independent from them. So expansion of museums is the expression of making a difference, of constant transformation. What I also got wrong is that the incredible growing art museum is an organization. It's not just bricks. And what I think we are lacking today and in the past 20 years, 2001, is thinking and rethinking the organization of our museums. And I would like to talk about that. However, already 2 or 3 years later, Newsweek came up with this cover, the museum bubble. Because indeed, we got it all wrong. If we don't think about the expansion of the museum as an idea of transformation, if we don't think about the expansion of the museum as a way of radically rethinking our institutions, then it's not going to work. Then we only have debts and we live out of a bubble, and we know that the art market is a bubble. Many, many years later, there is again optimism. The Economist came out a few months ago with the museum as a temple of delight. And strangely enough, we didn't talk anymore in The Economist about museums getting bigger. We didn't talk anymore about museum works and works of art will get more and more expensive. The Economist was talking about the museum being a temple of delight because the museum is a place for encounters, is a place for the public, should be in the very first place, a place where we rethink what it means to be and to act in public. Interestingly enough, The Economist illustrated this idea, the museum being a temple of delight, and the fact that audiences were suddenly not a hindrance anymore, by this one picture. And this picture is, for me, like home play. In 2003, Tate Modern asked the Icelandic artist Ólafur Eliasson to participate in the Turbine Hall Unilever series. And Ólafur Eliasson and the curators and the management of the museum, they were quite irritated after a few days because they didn't know what to think anymore. There was something really going awfully wrong in the Turbine Hall and in Tate Modern. Not only we had vast audiences, many more than ever. Remember, we made the building of Tate Modern for barely 2 million people. And already in 2003, we had about 3 to 4 million people. And they came because of this guy with his big son, with his weather project. What happened is they came en masse. That's not really a problem for the museum. It might be a problem for the cafes and the shops and the toilets, but not really. We want big audiences. No, what was wrong, what went awfully wrong, and what was in the first place irritating for the artists and the curators and the management of the museum is that all these people wanted to use the museum for themselves. They wanted to use the Turbine Hall and the weather project of Ólafur Eliasson just for themselves. They wanted to hang out. They wanted to have a picnic. They wanted to make love in the Turbine Hall. They wanted to have a sleepover. They took their children and they put their children down and said, this is kindergarten. And some of the weirdos, or the most intelligent ones, I don't know, they started to make their own art. They started to make happenings. What actually happened is that suddenly the audiences, which we always had considered as a hindrance for the geniality of the work of art, and the genius of the curator, and the genius of the director, suddenly the audiences were not a hindrance anymore. Not only not a hindrance, but suddenly they took over the museum. After a few weeks, the artists, the curators, the management of the museum said, this is not a problem. This is the solution. We have to rethink what the museum is and what we can offer. And I'm not only saying this because we have these millions of visitors. This can also happen in places where there may be 700,000 visitors, like at the Istanbul Modern. And that's a lot, because you know what? The most expensive and the most overly subsidized Swiss museum in Zurich or in Basel has only 350,000. And one of the greatest spaces in the world, led by a friend of yours, Defne Ayas, who is the curator of the Sarkis Pavilion, Turkey, next Biennale of Venice. She is leading in Rotterdam with the De Witt, and she has 18,000 people. We can do these things, which I'm going to tell you, with 18,000, with 350,000, with 700,000, with 2, 3, 4, 5 million people. We have to rethink the museum. And they use these spaces just like in the time of the weather project of Oliver Eliasson, they used them for themselves. So we decided to come up with a lot of what we call social space. The turbine hall is going to be the central marketplace where you can do whatever you want. Remember that Tate Modern is free. The collections and the use of the spaces, you only have to pay for the exhibitions. And we're also going underground with the tanks where you will be able to see live performances. And then people go up in the new tower. And the new tower will, of course, have collections and collection displays. But more than ever, there will be spaces for encounters. Instead of the 6 floors of the old building, 11 floors of the extension connected by 2 bridges spanning over the turbine hall, which is then becoming the expression of public space, which is definitely lacking in London. This is a view from the sky, and here you see also that Tate is not just inside a public space, but also very much outside the public space, because the bridge, we continue the bridge and we make sure that people can walk through the building, which makes quality of life in London to save in the morning 6 minutes and at night 10 minutes, which is an expression of improvement of quality of life, because we know London is a congested city. And we give a lot of space, what we call unprogrammed space. You can do whatever you like. I don't even like anymore outside sculpture. I think it's too pre-programmed. What I like is just empty space, and you can do whatever you want. This is how it looks right now, and we will start cladding the building in a few weeks with these bricks. This is interesting because at the opening, in the summer of 2016, we will have all these spaces ready. We will have the tanks ready, the underground space for live performances, the turbine hall, the collection displays, the social rooms called Tate Exchange. We have exhibition wings, and we have, of course, space for education, which is one of the most important aspects of the museum today, because learning is going to become an artistic activity by itself. All these yellow pads are indicating that you can get free access to all these spaces. But in order to be free, you need also to generate some income. So these spaces, that's where we want to generate differentiated income. Free spaces and generate income. And you know why? Because we don't want to become this. This is the planned extension of the art gallery in Istanbul, in Dubai, in London, in Paris, with the oligarch bunker and the yacht portal and the truffle depository and the champagne VAT and the caviar silo and the billionaire suit and the helipad. This is the kind of museum we don't want, and this is the kind of museum you don't want, right? And if anybody else wants that, then I think they should go to the desert. There is so much space in the Gulf. You can do whatever. Bad news is that I just heard that the Louvre Abu Dhabi is being delayed until 2019, and that the Guggenheim might never be built. I don't know, because of the desert is getting too hot. I mean, never know. But the reason I'm showing you all of this is this. A couple of years ago, we asked all these millions of visitors, why do you want to come to Tate? Why do you come to Tate? And of course, people were saying, we're coming for inspiration. Of course, people were saying, we're coming for the emotional, aesthetical experience. And of course, people were saying, happy, lucky for us, intellectual, to gain knowledge. But most of the people at Tate, 45% were saying, we are coming because we want to spend time with others. We are coming because we need these kind of encounters in our life. And that was like bingo. Bingo, because indeed, the instinct of the Eliassons, the instinct of the Nixerotas, the instinct of the curators saying, it's not a problem that people are taking over the museum and that you can do whatever you want in this hall. Maybe let's take that as the point of departures, and let's make sure that people want to come to a museum to encounter artworks, to encounter artists, to encounter strange ideas, but also to encounter themselves and to encounter other people. Don't forget that the museum is the only place where voyeurism is not only allowed, but it's a good thing to do. Because in a museum, you're allowed to watch people watching art. Try to do it in the subway, you can get arrested for that in London. And like Woody Allen said, the museum is the most perfect dating place. If you look at the history of cinema, and you look at all these museum scenes, it's always about dating. It's one of the most fascinating things. Think about it. Anyway, so social space, to spend time with others, is absolutely key, and it's a clue. And we asked further, and people said, you know, we know something. We know something, all of us, something completely different. But we want to get to know people, artists, artworks, curators, who know something else. And now you have to think about a very difficult one. You know the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan? Jacques Lacan said, by the way, you know that Jacques Lacan and his equally intelligent intellectual wife, they owned this amazing pornographic painting of Courbet, L'Origine du Monde. So Jacques Lacan is very interested in museums. And Jacques Lacan said a museum, a cultural institution like a museum, is a place where people who don't own things want to tell and show something to people who are not really interested in these things. Wow. In French, it sounds even more weird. Try it in French. I can't do it. A museum, a cultural institution, is a place where people who don't own something want to show and tell these things they don't own to people who don't want these things. That's culture. That's culture. That is culture. Try to tell that to our mayors. Is that maybe the reason why we don't like to subsidize performance spaces? Is that maybe the reason why we don't like performance, why we are afraid of performance in museums? Could be. We will come back to that. Now it's getting silent. Now we're getting like, huh? You expect me to say something dangerous? No, this is what I want to say. This is now a new heavy hitter, because we were trying to come up with a slogan what we do, and we said to ourselves, maybe we are there to ask the questions Google can answer. Now Eric Schmidt, the owner of Google, wants to buy that sentence from us. We don't. I mean, the museum is this place where you can ask questions which Google can answer. For instance, try to go on Google tonight and just tap in the following question. Why did I hate Monica Bonvincini 10 years ago, and now I like her work? That's a good one. Or why do I not understand Sarkis? Or why don't I like the color rose? I mean, you know, all these kind of questions. The museum, by the way, is a place where you can ask all these questions, and you will never get the right answer. Because the museum is a place of eternal paradoxes. The museum is the only place, in difference of the media, where you combine old news with new news, where you can combine the simple with the very complex, the stupid with the very intellectual, the very expensive with the very cheap, the local with the very far away ideas, the old versus the new, the little versus the big, the bad versus the good, the beautiful versus the ugly, and where we can even start to see the beauty of the ugly and the ugly of beauty. We don't have to solve these contradictions and paradoxes. The museum is the only place in the world which is full of contradictions, and please don't solve them. That's what the museum is about. The museum is also becoming a mass medium, yet we don't know yet how to write the rules of this one mass medium. We don't know yet. We try, we don't know yet. What we do know, however, is that the museum is becoming more and more a place for encounters, that the museum is becoming more a place, a theater, the globe of the 21st century. You remember the opera in Vienna, Brussels, Paris. Italy was invented in the 17th, 18th century. And the opera was incredibly loud because people were shouting at each other. They hated each other. They were talking about politics. The opera was a place to perform the difference. Now the museum is slowly becoming a place to perform the difference. And maybe that's the reason why we see so much performance in museums and live activities. Could be. We'll see. We decided to start these social spaces operating at and beyond the intersection of curatorial, visitor experience, learning, research, and retail. Reorganize the museum. Don't think I'm only from the educational department. Never say I'm the curator and I don't want to deal with retail. All these functions are intermingled in the museum. That's fantastic, you know. We can do different things together. That's amazing. And we can do them together in public institutions, private public, and also private institutions. So let's be courageous about organizing and reorganizing the museum. And then we can start to ask questions. What are vital experiments in an age of austerity? What are the rules to be broken? What makes you change your mind? These are the questions we can ask operating in the museum. And not just by making exhibitions, not just by collection displays. All the actions of the museum have to constantly rephrase these questions without trying to solve them. The new museum, ladies and gentlemen, we know, very large audiences. I find 700,000 people here a lot. 5 million, Tate Modern, is a lot and maybe too much. And the museum is generating many different experiences from entertainment to learning. Fine. And it's becoming a distinct sector of the economy. But the future museum is going to be even something else. It's going to blur the distinction between producers and receivers. And culture is massively produced. Everybody thinks, everybody says, everybody believes, everybody hopes that he or she produces culture. We are constantly talking to sponsors, BMW, Audi, Mercedes. And you know what's funny? In these conversations, the first things these people, these representatives of the marketing departments of these car makers, they say to us, we are no longer car manufacturers, we are mobility providers. And I say, what kind of mobility? They say cultural mobility. Ein BMW mit Herz, a BMW with a heart. You know? It's all culture. Apple is culture, isn't it? Apple is culture. It's black. It's beautiful. Louis Vuitton, the it bags, it's a piece of sculpture. So we all have the pretension to produce culture. That's very interesting. Blur the distinction between producers and receivers. We all produce constantly on a daily basis culture. And culture is becoming indeed increasingly a precondition of all kinds of economical value systems, because culture is entrenched in the fabric of daily life. In the future, I also foresee that culture will depend less in the future museum on buildings in one place as on organizational models. The new Tate Modern, this, Margaret, is the bad news for tonight, where I take a distance from London. The new Tate Modern will be probably one of the last expressions of the museum as we know it. And the museum as we know it has always been a vast monolithical space with lots of stairs. And then above the entrance, we always see and feel and smell variations on the dictum, on the slogan of the French writer Paul Valéry. It depends on you, my dear visitor, if I, the work of art, will speak or keep my mouth shut. That's the museum how we know it. Now the museum is becoming completely different. The museum in the future will be smaller spaces, horizontal, not vertical. They will be everywhere. They can be flexible. We don't have enough money anymore to make that fast, monolithical stuff. And what is it the expression of? It's the expression of austerity. It's the expression of debt. It's the expression of what? The museum, the architecture of museums the past 200 years barely changed. It's always like the entrance, the shop, the ticket desk, and the cafe, and now you are lucky because you have the Bosporus, the terrace. And then you have the exhibition space and the library, blah, 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 blah. It's everywhere the same, everywhere the same. So we have to think also to rethink these kind of, how these spaces function and can take different spaces, especially today with the new museum, which is another form of expansion, which is, of course, the digital. Now, the funny thing is that the digital, the more successful you are online, and not just to have the collection online, but really try to think the digital as another form, as a terminal plus. The more successful you are on a terminal plus, the more audiences come into your museum. We experience it at MoMA, at Met, at Tate, which are the most successful in terms of digital visitors. We experience it on a daily basis that people say, because you are overly present online, we want to come into your museum. And then we say, why? And now I'm going to give the curators some courage. Why is that? Because everything is available, right? But we have a problem with selecting, choosing. We want to hear stories, but online everything is available and there are very few stories. I'm not interested in selfies and Instagrams, and I find people who take selfies with sticks utterly vulgar. It's pornographic. I always ask in spaces, please, can you put your stick down? People don't do it. They don't want to put their stick down. I mean, of course, I don't mean it ambiguous, but anyway. So the more you are online, the more you want to have stories. You want to find out who took that decision. A museum is a place of decision-making processes. We want to get to know this weird person, Levent, who is putting, my God, an Andy Warhol next to Marcel Duchamp. Why does he do that? We like that, these kind of stories. And we all need it, because the funny thing is that not only BMW and Audi, because they are mobility providers, they come constantly to us because they want to learn about subjectivities, but we also have the Zaras and the H&Ms and the Ikeas, and they come to us and say, we have all these products, but how can we put them together? How can we make them talk together? How can we make selections? We produce so much stuff to consume that we will need people who make stories, who package things. A museum is also a theater, because a museum is a weird thing. Not only we select things and we know these people who have been putting them together, these weird combinations, but also, you know, we have flickering monitors, we have glass boxes where we can see ourselves, we have darkness, light, curtains, sound. It's a theater. Let's rethink also, let's be a little bit more ambitious about what it means to make an exhibition. We had so many great designers in the past. Carlos Scarpa, Friedrich Kiesler. They made the most extravagant exhibition designs. What do? We hang a painting on a wall. We make sure there is light and a text. And we want you to go through it. Bam. Isn't it funny that more and more museums are also asking choreographers to make the museum dance? Boris Karmat is taking over, he's a French choreographer, the museum, not only of modern art, not only of the Met, but also Tate. Anna-Therese de Keersmaker is constantly performing in museums, not only because they want to discover new temporal structures, but also the museum is a wonderful place in order to think what choreography could mean. Because we always perform something in a museum, even when we have to do this from painting to painting. So let's think about also what we can do there. And it's very interesting that we have to do it because, you know what? Because of whatever is going on in the world, many disciplines become extinct. Pop music, it's very hard to make money with pop music these days. And you see more and more rock performers who want to come to the museum because their medium is becoming extinct, and they still want to say, hey, we contributed something valuable to culture. But there is no place for us to go. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is not really where Kraftwerk and Patti Smith and U2 want to hang out. They all want to perform in Tate Modern or the Neue Nationalgalerie. They come to us. We even had an offer of the Rolling Stones. They wanted to do something in the Turbine Hall. Not ideal because the acoustics is really bad. P.G. Harvey is now performing in public as a performance in London, in Somerset. Fashion photography. Not only the marketing campaigns, they are look-alike because that's what the industry wants, but you know, what do you do when everything becomes online? So fashion photography is suddenly becoming a museum discipline. Peter Lindbergh, David Bailey, Richard Avedon, Saskia Sassen, Ronald Stopes, the big guys, the author guys, Nick Knight of fashion photography, they are now collected and they want to be in the museum. The same with dancers. I mean, all these things are becoming part of the museum. So if we are confronted with all these different disciplines, then we have to rethink, indeed, the organization of the museum. I already said to you that cultural goods are exceptional because of the conversations that make them cultural. I talked about all these contradictions, which you have to let be contradictions. But also there are all these other things you can do, and that is indeed to think about what the museum is. Massive, passive, or active participation. What we don't want in a museum is to become a Teflon coating for a lack of democracy. We don't want the museum to imitate Occupy whatever. We shouldn't imitate something which we don't even understand what it's going to be. What is going to be basis democracy? What is going to be the ballot system? We have to really watch out and making a difference between active and passive participation. We try sometimes to deal with this with our, now don't laugh please, with our BMW Tate Life Journeys, sponsored by BMW, thank you. What we, thanks the money to be from the cultural mobility provider BMW can do is that we invite performers to do something for the web, only for the web. Not in the museum, but only in the web. And most of these projects are about what it means to participate and to make a difference between active and passive participation. This is a very interesting form of active participation. It's not about the millions, it's about 10 or 20 people. Because just as with the banking industry and everywhere else, we have a big problem with the big museums and everywhere else. That is, we can only present the really big and the really small. The blockbuster and the niche. The problem is the medium product. So Tate is living of the blockbusters, Matisse, but also of the niche. And these are important niches. This is a project by Ahmet Oghut, who you know. And he was invited by Tate to come up with an idea to make a project. And he said, I would like to have the museum during the whole year. That's not easy to organize. He said, let's give it a try. And what Ahmet Oghut proposed was to organize a university with a pay system where people, asylum seekers, immigrants, jobless immigrants, could come and perform their knowledge, could come and perform their craft. So we had lectures of the Silent University organized by Ahmet Oghut, lectures dealing with the AIDS crisis in Johannesburg by a doctor of Johannesburg who is now driving a cab in London. We had Afghani engineers coming to talk about drainage systems and their proposals for new drainage systems in London. These Afghani engineers, they're working in kitchens in hotels. Some of them work in the kitchen of Tate Modern. So it was a way to ask what is participation meaning. And now the BBC is taking over as a new form of open universities this project by Ahmet Oghut. Remember that Ahmet Oghut did in Dubai this wonderful project called the VIP Intern Lounge. Because one of the biggest problems of big cities, turbo-capitalistic cities like London and New York, is that we are exploiting the masses, young people. And often, because of their enthusiasm, young people are exploiting themselves. And they become interns for life, so to speak. So what did Ahmet Oghut do in Dubai? He organized a lounge in the Dubai Art Fair where the interns working in Dubai for banks, for fashion, for shops, for art, could come and complain about their work conditions. And he was going to teach them, based on the Italian philosopher Paolo Virno, tricks, to trick their bosses out. And one of the great things you can do as an intern, I don't know if there are any interns, is don't respect deadlines. When the boss is asking, make that work ready on Friday at 6 o'clock, don't do it. Wait until Monday, 11 o'clock, and the whole system is gone. It's a wonderful trick. It's really a wonderful trick. So sabotage, deadlines. Another form of resistance is sleeping over. Don't sleep, just sleep. It's the most beautiful form of resistance. You're not going to be arrested, you just sleep. Think about it. Did you read the book of Jonathan Crary, Sleepless, The End of Sleep and Late Capitalism? You should read it, it's wonderful. Google and Apple, they don't want us to sleep anymore. Hey, but there must be an idea behind. What happens now if we all sleep 14 hours a day? You will see, you will be on time for my lecture here, okay? And there are many indirect effects of cultural participation. Innovation, welfare, sustainability, social cohesion, new entrepreneurship, soft power, local identity, knowledge economy. We figured with the European community that those countries where cultural participation is the highest, people are much, 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 much happier. And cultural participation doesn't mean that everybody has to become an artist. Cultural participation can mean many different things. The way that you're here, that you came en masse here, is cultural participation. The fact that tomorrow night you will see the most beautiful film in the film festival in Istanbul, Horseman by Pedro Costa, and that you only talk about it because you don't get a ticket anymore is a form of cultural participation. So there are many forms of cultural participation. And interestingly enough, art and life is getting very much mingled. When I was walking with the artist Jeff Wall at Occupy St. Paul, Jeff was saying, they must have watched my photographs. Because indeed, some of the people of Occupy, they were almost acting out the melancholia of Dürer, sitting in front of their tents. So we see things in London and in cities where we don't know what they are anymore. When I'm in London, sometimes I see a group of people dressed up, doing different things. Could be a drug bust, could be a fashion shoot, could be a BBC soap opera. It could be a student's activity. It could be just people standing there dressed up. We don't know anymore what is fiction and what is reality. But what we do know, if we do things, then we need style. So in Tate, we are also going to organize a school to paint neatly these kind of posters and stands for mass demonstrations, because they don't look good. And in order to protest and come on, you need style. That Jean-Luc Godard said that already. So with Jeremy Deller, we are creating a school where you can learn how to paint letters. And you laugh now. But you know what? What is the basis of the commons? What the basis is of commoning, not communism, commoning, is litter, loiter, letter. The 3 L's. Litter, loiter, letter. And commoning is at the basis of the new museum we want to achieve. So we have to think, what are the physical and spatial expressions of this form of commoning? So start to paint in a neatly way letters. That would be a good beginning. Another thing is to rethink what we mean by membership. The Guardian, who is now going online very soon and moves their businesses to the east coast of the United States, they bought this huge property near King's Cross, and it's called The Hub. And what The Guardian is doing is they created a form of membership, and people want to come and meet the journalists. They want to come and discuss the news. They want to know, how did you find Snowden? And why is Oliver Stone making this film about Snowden, paid by the industry in Hollywood? How do these things work? And it doesn't work with, asking these questions on a blog or whatever. People want to belong to a community. They want to exchange things. And memberships is everywhere right now. People want to belong to a community. Tate has about 114,000 memberships representing, in the meanwhile, 124,000 individual members. I hear your memberships here is going wonderfully well, 1,500. But we have to be a little bit more ambitious what we mean by memberships. And memberships doesn't mean that you get reductions only at the bookshop. It doesn't mean that you get one glass of whatever for free and you have to pay for the next one. That's not really a form of membership. So if museums, if they want to be successful, if they want to activate a community, you have to think about what membership could be. This is a good example of The Guardian. It's amazing. It's so successful right now. I remember on the day of the attacks in Paris that The Guardian decided to call artists who they know were around in the city, and they called the museum and said, is that artist here in the museum? Can she or he come over to the Guardian Hub and discuss with the public? All these things are a possibility. They are a possibility because artists are interested in what's going on in real life. This is the work of Tania Bruguera, who is now, as you know, arrested in Cuba, Havana. Tania made a series of work called Tatlin Whispers, where she invites people to say whatever they want, even in Havana. Take 1 minute, say whatever you want. No censorship, no self-censorship. What she did as a continuation of Tatlin Whispers at Tate, she invited 2 police horsemen to regulate the traffic of these millions of people visiting Tate. It was very interesting. We're going to do it again. Another example, of course, is Tino Segal. I could not show a picture of Tino Segal's performance work because it's highly forbidden by contract with the artist, but we found a trick. We invited the guy who makes these drawings in quartz to make a drawing. And of course, you know, ornament and crime, Tino couldn't say anything about this. The museum as a place for crime. What kind of crime? Talking to each other is a crime? Saying whatever you want is a crime? So we found an image for that. This is Little Britain. It's not great, isn't it? I mean, this is Great Britain, it's not little. This was Britain a few years ago for Tate. And for the art world, this was it. Europe and America. This is Tate right now. Not that we have everywhere Abu Dhabi's, Louvres, and Guggenheims. We don't want that. But we have a network. We have connections. We're trying to exchange with one another. We're trying to establish new bridges. And sometimes it doesn't work. That's okay. Failure is something to be accepted, especially in cultural processes. I mean, why shouldn't we accept failure and think about what failure is? You know what? Boston Consultancy is now thinking about how to make money to consult people to accept failure. Because it's happening in banks, no? So failure is a cultural phenomenon which we have to deal with. And in art, lots of good things are happening through the acceptation of failure. I'm also showing this because Ulrich Beck, the famous German sociologist who died a few weeks ago, one of his last essays was called Kooperieren oder Scheitern. To cooperate or to fail. You don't have a choice. It's between life and death. And life means, to be alive, means cooperation. And especially in culture, we have to learn this idea of cooperation because culture is a porous system. It's a transparent system. And that's what we have to learn also with our cultural institutions, to learn what it is, cooperation. We can show things, we can show the way, we can come up with different forms of organization. Cooperation means also to look for things which you don't know yet, and that's the way Tate Modern opened. Tate Modern opened with Century City, a look into different cities, not just the big cities we know, but also Lagos and also Bombay, and of course also Rio de Janeiro. It's very interesting that culture is an amazing form of, indeed, mobility. And our museum should be also an expression of that very, very mobility. And mobility, of course, means also that you start to look for what it means to be mobile within a given culture, because we are becoming so different. And please do not call it anymore immigrants or diaspora. It's all about performing the difference, which is incredibly important, and we can give an expression to that through means of the collections and through the way we constitute exhibitions. So we spend a lot of time in Tate in looking over our shoulder in what's happening in other regions and in different regions and in different centers. And of course, we are looking at the past of London because London was for Latin America a very, very important city at the time of the dictatorial regimes in Latin America. But London is also a place where Saloua Raouda Choucair, the Lebanese sculptress of 80 years old, came once in a while when she was studying in Paris and went back to Lebanon. And performing the difference means that you put these unknown names or rediscovered names or names to be explored next to the names we know, like Liechtenstein. And that's what I mean with the very big and the niche. And sometimes the niche is becoming very big, and in the art world at least, sometimes the really big, think of Damien Hirst, is becoming really small. This is the work of Saloua Raouda Choucair. What we also try to do is give an expression to tensions in the world. This is the work of Leon Golub, talking about one of the dramas of the Vietnam War, which was the drama of My Lai. And so he painted his painting of My Lai, where US soldiers were killing Vietnamese citizens, suspecting them to work for the Viet Cong. And we decided to hang that in front of this incredible painting by Al-Azawi. And it's, of course, a painting which is evoking the Sabra and Shatila massacre. It's the Guernica of the Middle East. So we are opposing these icons who we know with icons coming from somewhere else. And that's incredibly important to create in museums the unexpected. Because where else can we still create unexpected? So we bought a museum. An entire museum which is taking over a whole floor of Tate Modern, which is the Museum of Contemporary African Art from the Beninois artist Meshach Gaba. It's a parasite museum. It's a Tate, Africa Tate, not over there in the Gulf, but it's an Africa Tate within Tate. And the implications of buying such a museum are, of course, manifold. Because what do you have to think about these weird objects? What do you have to think about that museum within a museum? What does it mean when an object, a strange object, comes into a place which says, I am a museum? And that's very important, and that's where I would like to end, that every museum has always to say, I am a museum. Thank you very much. In any case, thank you so much for being here. I hope that this little manifesto about what we can do with museums, that it's also helpful to the situation in your city, indeed reinventing what it means to be a museum, to be a cultural place. So really thank you for having me here again.